Pea Ridge campaign began on Christmas Day, 1861, with the appointment of Brigadier General Samuel Ryan Curtis to command the Army of Southwestern Missouri by Major General Henry W. Halleck. Curtis's main objective was to purge Missouri of its Confederate and pro-Confederate forces. By mid-February 1862, he and his troops had pushed their main opponents, Major General Sterling Price and the pro-Confederate Missouri State Guard, south and west of northern Arkansas. Pea Ridge was a decisive victory for the Federal Army. Even though the Federal forces were outnumbered by the Confederates and had been surprised by Van Dorn's bold moves, the Battle of Pea Ridge was one of the few times in the Civil War that a Federal Army would have to fight at such a disadvantage. Former Missouri Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson arrived at Pea Ridge on March 8th. That was the last day of the battle, but was unable to influence the battle. After the battle, Jackson and other members of the state government who sympathized with the South moved to southern Arkansas. Jackson died of cancer at age 56 near Little Rock on December 6, 1862. Missouri's 15th governor is buried in Sappington Cemetery at Arrow Rock, Saline County, Missouri. The battle summary: total forces engaged 26,500, with 16,000 Confederates versus 10,500 Union. The Confederate forces had a numerical advantage just greater than 1.5 to 1. Estimated total casualties for the Grim Reaper's Butcherville were 3,884, with 1,384 Union and 2,500 Confederates. The Union forces had around 50 field guns, while the Confederate force had approximately 21 guns, primarily deployed by the Missouri State Guard on the first day of battle. The victory came down to one important factor: leadership. The outcome of the battle rested squarely on the shoulders of Samuel Ryan Curtis. He led his army capably and skillfully. His division and brigade commanders fought aggressively, took the initiative when it was required, and served their chief well. Throughout the campaign, Curtis allowed his commanders enough flexibility to adapt to the changing situations while still retaining control. Each time the Confederates appeared to gain the upper hand, a different leader stepped forward and executed a bold counter move. Osterhaus and Davis at Leetown, that was on the first day. Carr at Elkhorn Tavern on the second. Siegel on Wellesley's Knoll, that's where they were elevating the cannon on top of the knoll. And Dodge on the Bentonville Detour. That's the road that runs around behind the ridge on the north side. Pea Ridge aftermath. After the Battle of Pea Ridge, Confederate General Earl Van Dorn claimed that he was incapacitated during the battle due to a prior injury suffered while jumping a ditch on horseback and a fever from fording an icy stream. He used this as reasons to mitigate the blame for his defeat to the numerically inferior Union forces. His superiors did recognize that Van Dorn's specialty was cavalry, and at Pea Ridge, he was leading infantry, so he suffered no loss in rank. Following his defeat, Van Dorn's army was transferred to the Army of Tennessee, where he commanded at the Second Battle of Corinth, Mississippi, Mississippi, fought on October 3rd and 4th of 1862. He was again commanding the infantry. Early in the battle, Van Dorn initially was winning, only to be defeated by Major General William S. Rosecrans because of a failure of his reconnaissance team to recognize and react to the Union threat. This failure resulted in his court-martial for neglect of duty, though he was ultimately found not guilty. Corinth was strategically important to the Confederacy, and it was a rail junction of the Memphis and Charleston North-South Railroad and the Mobile and Ohio East-West Railroads. Both the terminations there are on the seacoast and provided an opportunity to, if you could get around the Union blockade, to export Southern produce and import arms and ammunition, making it a critical location for controlling the Confederacy's transportation and supply lines. He was later assigned to John C. Pemberton's Cavalry Corps in the Army of Mississippi, won a victory in the Battle of Holly Springs, Mississippi, on December of 1862 by destroying Union supplies and capturing many Union soldiers. On May 7th, 1863, while at his headquarters in Spring Hill, Tennessee, he was shot by Dr. George Bodie Peters, reportedly jealous of the attention Van Dorn was paying to his wife. He was buried in Port Gibson, Mississippi, near the plantation where he was born. Pea Ridge was a decisive victory for the Federal Army. General Albert Pike commanded the Indians, accompanied by their Cherokee tribal chief and Confederate Colonel Stan Waddy, who commanded the 2nd Cherokee Mounted Rifles. Major General Earl Van Dorn was not impressed with their performance at Pea Ridge and refused to acknowledge Pike or Waddy in his official report. Pike was a prodigious man of some 350 pounds and spent most of the battle in his covered wagon, suffering from cold and fever. Pike, upset with Van Dorn's stance and devoted to his charges, led those Indians wishing to follow him to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, and worked diligently to see them settled. He was an attorney, a barrister, and he had represented the civilized tribes in many circumstances to try to recover their territory. And the Cherokee of Waddies weren't originally supposed to move, but gold was discovered on their territory. The South needed gold to buy armament, and so they were on the march. He was, this is Waddy, he was also the last Confederate general to surrender to the Union on July 23rd, 1865 at Dokesville, Oklahoma. This is Indian Territory. It's near Fort Houston. This was after the Confederate surrender at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865, and the last battle fought at Palmetto Ridge, Texas, May 13th of 65, and more than 4 days after Juneteenth, which we celebrated here recently, which was June 19th in Galveston, Texas, where 250,000 enslaved blacks were freed. Following his victory at Pea Ridge, Union General Samuel Curtis continued his Arkansas campaign, eventually capturing Helena, Arkansas, on July 12, 1862. Its location at the confluence of the St. Francis and Mississippi rivers and north of Vicksburg enabled it to become a key forward logistical base for Union forces in the Mississippi Valley. Following this victory, Curtis was promoted to Major General. Pea Ridge would be a proving ground for some of the Federal Army's most successful leaders. Curtis and Ashball would command military districts during the war. Sigel would command an army. Davis and Dodge would each command a corps. Carr would command a cavalry division. And then there was Sheridan. At Pea Ridge, Sheridan held rank of colonel and was serving as the chief commissary officer and quartermaster general of the Army of Southwest Missouri. His effective management and logistical support were crucial to the success of the battle. He would rise to be General-in-Chief of the United States Army, only the fourth man after Washington, Grant, and Sherman to wear the 4 stars of a full general. Final comment, Curtis's strategy at Pea Ridge was consistent with the reigning military philosophy of his day, influenced by the Prussian general Karl von Clausewitz, which stated that the goal of the army should be the destruction of the opposing army rather than the seizing of any particular military objective. Thank you. Yeah. Any questions? Justin.
Questions or comment? Unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay.
Ernest Van Dorn, when this all began, he was.
When it all began,
Because
yeah, he was.
and all them were there.
He was in the East, and he came across southern Missouri and came to the battle site basically from the east. That was his path. Yes.
Not a question, but a comment. A couple
sure.
years ago, I talked about the Cherokee and the Civil War, and there were a lot of legends and bad mouthing of indigenous people supposedly, acting up and possibly trying to capture cannon. And I think a lot of the myths about what we used to call American Indians, came out of that. Unfortunately,
You're absolutely correct, and I ran across that, and I did pursue that, and there were no authenticated accounts of scalpings or anything like that at Pea Ridge. Yeah, that had to come up. One interesting observation that I made is most of the participants at Pea Ridge, at least the junior commanders, not Curtis, but the junior commanders that were operating under Curtis, participated at Wilson's Creek. And the 2 casualties there at Leetown, both of them fought for the Confederacy at Wilson's Creek, as did Sigel. He fought there. And I think just about everybody did except for the Indians and their attorney, Pike. Yeah. So I think that's all I have.
Other questions out there? Comments? I have just one short comment about Curtis. He was a hero as a result of this, and consequently, several forts were named after Curtis. A fort built at Helena, Arkansas was called Fort Curtis, and there was one at Ironton, Missouri, named after Curtis. This was long before the building of Fort Davidson. The Fort Curtis site is kind of southeast of the main part of Ironton, and there's a church and a parking lot on that site at this time. You can get up there to it if you can find your way around those streets in Ironton.
One final comment about Curtis. He um, died, and there is a magnificent equestrian statue of Curtis. He's buried in Forest Lawn Cemetery in Keokuk, Iowa, and there's an absolutely magnificent monument to him overlooking the Mississippi River there. He was responsible at one point in his career for work on the river at Keokuk. In fact, he was mayor of Keokuk at one point. He was mayor of Keokuk. And the same year he was elected mayor of Keokuk, he was elected to Congress and served 2 terms in the U.S. Congress. One of the first Republicans under Lincoln.
I
David
have a
Carroll
question. One thing I
Mallory.
didn't.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I heard on the video that confused me. Maybe I just missed it. Who was the guy that was in the wagon that was overweight and sickly?
Oh, yeah, that was Pike, Howard Pike. Yes, he was a barrister. He had a very interesting, colorful career. He was a duelist. Apparently, he was involved in some sort of duel to defend his honor at one point, and his opponent shot into the ground. I mean, he just didn't want to participate in the duel, and Pike heard the shot, and apparently he wasn't watching what the guy was doing, thought he had shot at him, and so he turned around and shot him and killed him. And so they took it to trial, and the judge just kind of threw up his hands. It was yes, he killed a man in cold blood, but he thought, he thought it was in self-defense, so he wasn't penalized for that.
Other questions out there?
He was also a poet.
Wow. Okay.
I've got one more thing to add.
Yeah, excuse me.
Sure.
Yeah.
At this time, the Missouri State Guard, most of the Missouri troops were State Guard. Some were being transferred or enlisted into the Confederate service as Confederate regiments, and a good number of low-digit Missouri Confederate regiments came out of this battle. Now, some of the State Guard did not choose to go Confederate and came back to Missouri and became guerrillas. So they kind of split up like that. This Missouri Brigade, as it eventually became called, was one of the better fighting forces of the Confederate Army. They did not get across the Mississippi until after the Battle of Shiloh, but were able to participate in the battles at Iuka and Corinth. And eventually they participated in the battles around Vicksburg and Vicksburg's siege itself. They moved on further east and later on became part of Hood's campaign up through the middle of Tennessee and got the stuffing cut out of them at, of course, Franklin, which was one of bigger disasters for Confederate armies around that time. They went on to Nashville. Their end up was at Fort Blakely near Mobile, Alabama. a book titled In Deadly Earnest was written about the Missouri Brigade. And it was authored by Phil Gottschalk, a Colombian who was a founder of this particular roundtable.
I read this book.
And I don't think there's any recent issues of the book available, but I'm sure you could find it online on Amazon or some other place like that. And it's well, I consider it probably the definitive book written about the Missouri Brigade. Andy may disagree with me on that, but it's out there. I did see this is some years ago, copies of it at some of the battle visitor centers around the country. I can't remember which one or where it was. And so if you have a chance to get your hands on a copy, it's a long book, but the history in it is very good. Phil, of course, is no longer with us. I'm sorry to say. Anything else?
I might mention for interest of those interested in the Civil War, the Missouri Historical Society at this time is featuring a video on Civil War forts that I viewed today, and it's very, very interesting on especially these are forts in southeast Missouri. One of the members of the society, Stephen Limbaugh, you may have heard of his son. Anyway, he gave just a tremendous presentation on the one down there at Cape Girardeau and talked about several others in that area. So I would encourage those interested to view that program.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, just moving on to a conclusion. Our next month's program in April is going to be by Stephen Stark, and he's going to talk about some of the slaves that sued for their freedom during wartime.
Interesting.
And it should be a very interesting program. I'm sorry we couldn't get it done in March, Black History Month, but April is close enough.
Yeah.
Anything else?